Reasonably practicable. This term is made basic by Basic Safety and Training Solutions. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to say you need to reduce the risk so far as is reasonably practicable? We often hear this phrase without fully understanding what it means. In the next few slides, we're going to break it down in a manner that is easier for us all to understand. Step 1 is identifying the hazard. You cannot even begin to try and identify or assess the risks in your workplace without knowing what hazards exist in your workplace. In order to know what hazards exist in your workplace, you need to know and understand your scope of work. The best place to start is by using a company method statement, which will identify what the task or the job is, where it is to be carried out, what tools, instruments, or equipment will be required, what employees will be required, including their skill levels, as well as providing the method that is to be used to carry out the task. Only then can you begin to identify the hazards that are present. You can then move on to step 2 and identify the risks that are attached to each hazard. Once you've identified the hazards, you can then identify the risks attached to each of the hazards present. It does not end there. Once you've identified the risks, you then need to establish the level of each risk and rank them from highest to lowest. Then you can focus on controlling the risks that are presented or that present themselves with either existing control measures that are in place or implementing new measures to control the risks. There is a legal requirement for employers to do all that is reasonably practicable to protect their employees from exposure to the impact of any of the risks that may be attached to the hazards within their workplace. In order for this to be successful, this process of mitigating or implementing control measures would have to be done before work commences, or in the case of an existing contract or job, tolerating the level of risk by maintaining the existing controls or implementing additional control measures to manage or further reduce the residual risk. In order to be able to do this, you take the existing degree of risk, multiply or times that by probability or likelihood, multiply or times by the consequences or impact, and place it in the specific environment it is found. You then balance that against the cost of implementing mitigation. The great thing here is that the employer can use their own common sense in balancing the scales, so to speak. We look at the simple example. For the high risk, the multiple injuries and fatalities, it would be reasonable to incur costs of in excess of 1.2 million to prevent this from occurring or to minimize this. One would say it is reasonable to consider this amount when considering the damages that could occur if left unmitigated. The same cannot be said about the possibility of damaging a few replaceable hand tools and treating 2 lacerations annually. One would consider incurring the costs of 1.2 million unreasonable, when the damages that are likely to incur may not even amount to 5,000 Rand, including medical costs. So all that should be done must always therefore be reasonably practicable. For example, consider quality-approved hand tools, provide procedures and training on working with hand tools, pre-task planning, and hire. To prevent the loss of life, however, one would have to apply the same measures or the same reasonably practicable measures. Think of what you would do to prevent the loss of life of a loved one. That is exactly what one would require an employer to do, and no less than that. For example, introduce life-saving rules, build machine guards, isolate the source of the hazard using all practical means available.